Welcome, everyone, to Sunlight of the Spirit, Meeting of Cocaine Anonymous. My name is Natasha, and I am an addict. It's no accident that we are holding this 12-week speaker series before the convention starts. Over the next weeks, you can expect to hear from a different speaker each week, share their experience on one of the 12 steps. That's right, 12 weeks, 12 speakers, 12 steps. If you missed previous weeks, don't worry, you can access our recordings online. We are very excited to have you all here today as we prepare our minds and spirits for what is certainly going to be a memorable and historical event, the Sunlight of the Spirit Conference Belgium, first ever. Today we've invited Cameron F. to share a message of death and wait on step 4 for the next 40 to 50 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Natasha. My name is Cameron. I'm an alcoholic addict who doesn't drink or use anymore. Thanks to this amazing program, this amazing, simple program of 12 steps that allows me to broker a relationship with the one who's got all the power and easily control my desire to drink or use, and hence recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Let's see. Just a quick note about my background. This is a sculpture called The Wounded Healer. The Wounded Healer is a Jungian concept. It's the Wounded Healer is simply someone who's had a lived reality, who attempts to help others through their own darkness and carries both a profound power and serious danger. Healer Henry J.M. Nowen, who wrote the book The Wounded Healer, quoted, "On a human level, withdrawal from myself aids others to come into being." And that's what we do as wounded healers. We've been wounded by our illness, and earns us the right to carry that message to someone who is in their suffering and show them a way out. That's a pretty amazing thing to experience. So today's subject matter, step 4. Oh, the infamous step 4. There's a lot of intrepidation. A lot of people tend to go out on step 4 in lieu of what they might have to disclose, what they might have to face. And I think there's a lot of misnomers and a lot of misconceptions about step 4 and the complexity that often goes with it. Now, if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And the reason most people continue to always do what they've always done and get what they've always got is they have no idea what they've always been doing. And step 4 is a fact-finding, truth-facing endeavor that wakes us up, that raises our consciousness to ourselves and what stands in the way of finding greater power in our life so we can easily control our desire to drink or use or act out. Now, the reason we're doing a step 4, just to backtrack, I realized in step 1 that I'm truly powerless and my life is unmanageable. I will drink and I will use again, and to do so puts me on a trajectory to those gates of insanity or death. And there's nothing human, secular, or psychological that's going to save me from that outcome. And that's a horrifying conclusion behind step 1. We die on step 1. Yet I come to the rooms and I meet people that are like me or even gone down the rabbit hole further than I have, and they don't do it anymore. And I think, how is that possible? And I ask these people, how did you find a way through it? And they say, well, you have to have certain essentials in place in order to get this thing we call a higher power. Well, what are they? You got to be honest. You got to be willing. You got to be open-minded. Well, I got that. I can do that. You know, Mark Houston passed away in 2010, coined the phrase, and I always love it because I use it as my guideline when working with others and part of the essentials. When you don't care, I can't. And when you do care, I must. And I will bend over backwards for anyone who cares to find a solution to what ails them and help them in that journey. So with the essentials in place, then comes step 2. Well, I need a power greater than myself. I need a power greater than the god of cocaine, the god of crack, the god of alcohol, the god of marijuana, the god of benzos, or any of these other gods that we experience. And and I need it. Where is it? Where do I find it? And then I'm told, and this is another paradox of our program, we find the great reality deep down within ourselves. You're telling me there's a power deep down within me that's far greater than the god of cocaine. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's the flimsy reed we talk about in the big book. The flimsy reed, a concept of a power greater than ourselves. That seems so flimsy when you measure it against things like treatment centers and detox and sponsors and reading your big book and going to meetings and pitiful and incomprehensible demoralizing experiences. And I go, that sounds so flimsy. You're telling me a power greater than myself, a belief in that is going to save my ass, but all these other tangible, measurable things will fail me? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Seems really flimsy. But as we start this journey, this brokering of a relationship with the one who has all the power, we come to understand that the flimsy reed is really the all-encompassing power of the divine consciousness itself, the hand of the divine consciousness. And when I touch it, connect with it, commune with it, I light up. And all that it takes to do step 2 is the belief in a power greater than ourselves, and we let the testimony of people in the rooms bear witness to this power at play, of this divine power doing for you what you could not do on your own, and our ability to be honest with ourselves and to search diligently within ourselves. And you can join us on the broad highway. And that's all step 2 is. And then step 3 is that decision. Turn my will and my life over the care of God as I understand it. Well, what do we mean by that? What do we do? Well, to turn our will over means we're going to turn our thinking over. My thinking on a low-level consciousness of a fight, flight, reptilian brain, satiating all my hedonistic tendencies, always leads me into a disastrous state of being. And I learned that in step 1. So I'm gonna fire this liar that lives in my head, constantly convincing me this time somehow, some way I'm going to be able to control and enjoy my drinking and using. I'm going to defeat that liar by firing the liar and employing a higher level of consciousness. I'm going to put my thought life on a higher level. And cleared of wrong motives, I'm going to come to know what this power is. And the other thing is to put my actions, my behaviors on the level of doing God's will rather than Cameron's will. And a 12-step program is a spiritual, moral approach to the efficacy of our addiction. It's not secular, it's not human, it's not psychological. It is a spiritual, moral approach. And so, we have that affirmation, that decisional, that prayer that where I decide I'm going to fire the liar, hire God, in our step 3 prayer where we turn our lives over to the care of God as we understand it. I offer myself to thee to do with me and build with me as God wills, and to relieve me of the bondage of self. Well, what does the bondage of Cameron really look like? And step 4 is going to help reveal and crystallize what that looks like. And may I do God's will always. So we're being reborn into a new existence, a new way of life, where the divine consciousness is the principal or my boss, and I am the agent of that principle. I am the agent of that divine consciousness. That's our new job description. I always like when I go in the rooms, hi, my name's Cameron, agent of God. How can I be helpful to you? Because that's our new role in life. But what happens is when I first start to try and connect to this inward reality, I'm so blocked. I've got crazy resentments going on. I'm full of fear. I've got guilt and shame over the horrible things I've done. So I need to do some kind of inventory, assessment of where I'm at and what needs to be done. And this is what step 4 is all about. It makes a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. The key word is moral inventory, not a psychological one, not a disclosure of all your deep, dark, embarrassing little secrets. They may come out, but that's not really what step 4 is about, in my experience with it. It is a process whereby I get right with myself. I'm going to get right with Cameron here in this fact-finding, truth-facing endeavor. Now, how do I know I made a decision in step 3? How do I know my prospect made the decision in step 3? And an epistemological benchmark for this, and no, epistemology is not the study of urine samples. It is the science of how we know what we know. And it says right in our big book, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. That tells me they meant it, because they're delving into this course of vigorous action and this house cleaning. And though our decision, our step 3, to fire the liar and hire God, it's vital and a crucial step into our program, it will have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us from having a greater, higher consciousness. And this is what tells me I meant my decision, and tells me whether or not the prospect has made the decision. And what we do is we look at certain manifestations in our lives to figure out what this moral inventory looks like. What are these root causes and conditions that cause my failure in life? And the biggest failure being I can't control my desire to drink, use, or act out. So we're going to search for these flaws, and we look at 3 common manifestations to tease them out. We're going to look at resentments, we're going to look at fears, and we're going to look at the harms that we've done. Now, there's some controversies here in our big book text in the step 4 context. You know, they say resentment is the number 1 offender. I got to really question that, because resentment and a coffee pot, or nowadays resentment and a Zoom license, has literally spawned over 300 different 12-step fellowships and millions of recovery meetings, all based on a resentment. So there's something good happening there, I think. The reason resentment is the number 1 offender is because when I'm resentful, when I am angry, because the world is not doing what I want to do, and I resist what is, then I get angry and resentful, and then I want revenge. And I suffer the symptoms of my malady. I get restless, I get irritable, I get discontented, bored, depressed, anxious, and that activates the liar in my head and says, hey, we need our solution back. And our solution is the god of cocaine or the god of alcohol. And that leads to a whole other disaster. Now, it goes on to say that from this resentment stems all forms of spiritual disease. For we've not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. Now, what I posit here is what Bill is saying, and this is an old argument, and I'm not really here to debate this argument, the 2-fold illness versus the 3-fold illness. I'm a 3-folder. Based on Bill's statement that we've not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick, and then follows up with, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Now, we know from the doctor's opinion, I have a physical illness, right? I have a physical sensitivity to mind-altering substances. And when I ingest them, my body reacts very differently than what the muggles, which are non-magical people, Harry Potter term, it don't experience. Like when my wife has a drink, she gets a warm, fuzzy feeling, but then she gets a little nauseous and she gets tired, and she doesn't like that, and she stops after the first drink. I never, ever got that experience when I drink or use. Once I start, it's like, wow, yeah, this is the way I want to be 24/7. So my body physically has an allergy, as the doctor's opinion claims, a sensitivity to mind-altering substances, because it solves my problem of being restless, irritable, and discontented. Now, we know it goes deeper than our bodies, otherwise detox would have solved our problem. Once we safely remove the effects of alcohol or crack or benzos or whatever from our physical beings, there's no chemical creating that phenomenon of craving. But we know it goes deeper than the body, because even after thorough detoxing, my mind is not well. My mind is sick. And my mind lies to me that this time when I drink or use or act out, I'm somehow going to be able to control and enjoy it. And the liar would always win the argument untreated. And this is the mental component, the mental obsession, the mental illness. But Bill's saying it goes deeper than that. It goes to a spiritual malady, an overt sense of selfish self-centeredness. Now, when I act out in a selfish, self-centered way, and most people are acting out in the same way on the planet, and we're all colliding with one another like billiard balls bouncing off everyone, and I'm not getting my way, the actors are not being arranged to the show that I want, I suffer the symptoms. I get restless, irritable, discontented. That activates the liar. The liar convinces me to put the first drink or drug in my body, and I'm off on another spree. So it's a threefold illness, one of the spirit, which triggers the mind, which triggers picking up the first drink or drug and sets me on that horrific trajectory to the gates of insanity or death. Now, Bill Wilson, when he wrote the big book, he hated using the same word twice, hated using the same phrase twice. So when we look at our big book literature and it talks about causes and conditions, defects of character, shortcomings, flaws in our makeup, the root of our troubles, bondage of self, they all mean the same thing. They're talking about character defects. Now, I did an analysis because that's the way my brain works. You know, I was a scientist. I graduated as a biologist in my early 20s. But I found drugs and alcohol a far more interesting research project than counting deer poop in the forest to figure out a deer population. So I went through the whole big book looking for every reference to every character defect that Bill talks about. And here's the list out of the 164. Pride, vanity, egotistical, self-pity, morbidness, jealousy, envy, suspicion, selfishness, self-seeking, selfishly, self-centeredness, unthinking, unjust, insincerity, dishonesty, lying, exaggeration, self-delusion, self-justification, callousness, cruelty, anger, grudge or grudges, rancor, crankiness, bitterness, hatred, antipathy, loathing, despise, overbearing, lethargy, impatience, fear, worry, cowardice, intolerance, lust, infidelity, inconsideration, antisocial, uncommunicative, slander, gossip, prejudice, criticism, ridicule, cynicism, diffidence, which means shyness, scrapping, quarrelsome, irresponsibility, careless, unreasonableness, apathy, martyring, fanatical, squandering, obstinacy, stubbornness, and maudlin, which is over-exaggeration of one's emotions. That was the list. I might have missed one or two, but that's the bulk of the character defects. And I go through that list with my prospect when I'm doing the step 4, just to get them thinking about character defects. Now, a lot of these words we don't use in today's vernacular, but this gets our mind thinking. Now, there's another, in addition to trying to overcome what makes me restless, irritable, and discontented, is I realize as an alcoholic, as an addict, I'm a sensitive person. Any sensitive people here? Anybody overly sensitive? You know, we're sensitive people, right? And I'm always being, you know, in that sense. And it goes on to say that it takes a long time to outgrow this serious handicap. You know, sometimes I get a lot of criticism from people in the fellowship, and they want to tell me all about it. They want to tell me what I'm not doing right or what's wrong about me. And my standard response is, whoa, hey, save it for your sponsor. Which drives them crazy. Remember, it's always better to give a resentment than to receive one. All kidding aside, though. So I'm very sensitive. What am I sensitive about? Well, I'm sensitive about my self-esteem. I'm sensitive about my security, my ambitions, my money, my relationships, and my sex. These are the areas of my life that are being tickled all the time by other human beings and institutions and principles. So when I look at my resentments, which is the first manifestation, I look at who am I really angry with? Who am I resisting as what is? You know, be it a person, be it an institution, or be it a principle. A person's pretty straightforward. An institution could be World Services of Cocaine Anonymous, or a principle like drug laws, you know, or God or spirituality. These are principles that I could be angry at. And so I take a look at who am I angry at? And then I want to look at, well, why am I angry? Why am I angry? Now, I use what's called a 5-column inventory. And I was talking to Wally P., who wrote the Back to Basics. And, you know, in the big book, Bill does a 3-column inventory, but what I posit there exists a 4 and a 5th column isn't there. And I asked Wally about this, and he said, Well, in the old days, they would put pen to paper to list the first three columns, but column 4, the character defects, and column 5, the spiritual principles, or what they called liabilities versus asset, was an oral discussion between sponsor and sponsee. And that's why the big book only lists 3 columns. By the way, why do we put pen to paper? This stems from an old concept called Kidlin's Law, Kidlin, Kidlin law, which states that a problem in your head, once noodled out on paper, is already halfway solved. Now, the treatment centers have bastardized this concept into a problem shared is a problem had. No, that doesn't really pan out. It goes back to Kidlin's Law. We noodle out what's going on our heads on paper, and we're halfway there. And then the other half of the solving the equation is working with another person. And as we're going through the inventory, sometimes it takes 2 to see 1. Because I've got blind spots. I might not see them when I'm doing an inventory with somebody. And so a good sponsor can sometimes see things that I can't see. It takes 2 to see 1. And that's what a good sponsor should be doing as we're doing the inventory process is, hey, wait a minute, have you considered this character defect in lieu of that particular resentment or what have you? So I list why am I angry. Now, a lot of addicts, in my opinion, want to do the backstory. They want to tell me all the reasons and all the justifications for their anger. And they go into the minutia. I first heard this word from Chris Sarr here. He was talking about the minutia in the rooms, and I like that word, minutia. And that's not really what the second column is about. Why am I angry? They disrespected me. That's a pride-based attack. They stole my money. You know, they're interfering with my ambitions and my relationships. They prevented me from seeing my child. Or they tell me what relationships I can do, or I got to wear a mask and I'm not allowed outside, and the list goes on. But I get down to the specific cause of why I'm angry. I don't need to know the backstory. You know the backstory, but I don't need to know it. And then I look at what it's threatening. Now, a lot of my threats are pride-based attacks on self-esteem. So my self-esteem gets affected, can be threatened a lot. I'm sensitive about my self-esteem. And then, you know, there's my ambitions, the things I want to accomplish in life that people get in the way of. There are, you know, my security, my safety in terms of my life and my freedom, especially freedom. Freedom is a big thing for me. And when governments are constantly interfering with that process, my sensitivities can get pretty threatened. My relationships with people, who I can see, who I don't have to see. Who am I free to associate with, and who do I freely not associate with? That they can be interfered with. And then, of course, sex. And, you know, all the things that can affect sexuality within myself. And in today's society, there's a lot of shit going on sex-wise that I think is pretty threatening. So if I'm not on top of where I'm at and doing my inventory, I start filling up with resentments. And then I start really experiencing the restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed things. And that activates the liar. And I run the risk of picking up a first drink or a drug. Or worse yet, I don't, and I slowly go insane, and I end up taking my own life. Suicide rates in 12 steps today is 80 times higher than normal society. An untreated addict in the first 5 years of abstinence with no program, I can't live with the booze and drugs, but I don't know how to live without them, go insane and take their own lives. I've had 10 people out of 50 people I've buried commit suicide. Would not see our way of life. And so this is the first 3 column. What am I angry at? Is it a person, an institution, or a principle? Why am I angry, and how does it threaten me? And then the instruction is that, and I couldn't wait. I had a list of all these people and institutions I was so pissed with, and I couldn't wait to sit down with my sponsor and do my bitch list because I had a lot of grievances to air. And then the instruction is putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I want to talk about the first 3 columns. No. That's all about you, Cameron. We're gonna shift. We're gonna put on a new pair of glasses here. Putting out of my mind the wrongs others have done, I resolutely look for my mistakes. What? My mistakes? They've done me more harm than I've done them. And I'm going to look where I'm being selfish, where I'm being dishonest, where I'm being self-seeking and frightened. Because as we know in step 3, our troubles are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, right? You know, Bill was very brave in putting forth the notion, I am responsible for my illness and I'm responsible for my recovery. Blaming others is not going to solve my problem. But that's what I want to do. I want to blame others for the way I'm feeling and behaving. But no, we're going to look where I've been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And though the situation had not been entirely my fault, I disregard the other entirely. And I'm going to look for my faults. You know, I'm going to look, the inventory's mine, not the other person's. And when I see my faults, I'm going to list them. I'm going to write them down in black and white. And I'm going to admit my wrongs honestly. And that's my column 4. What are the things that are coming up that manifest the selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened? These are kind of umbrella defects. But underneath, I want to get down to a root cause. And then, so that's our column 4, which comes out in the sharing of the inventory with another. Now, I've taken it one step further, and I encourage, when I'm working with a prospect, to write down their column 4 to reiterate this process from Kydland's Law. And we're willing to set matters straight. This is where they infer a 5th column. What am I going to do instead? And so, very simply, what I'm doing is I'm inverting the character defect into a spiritual principle. So instead of hatred, which blocks me from the power, it's acceptance, forgiveness, and love. And one is the bondage of Cameron, and the other is God's will for me in my affairs. And I start to build a track to run on. Now, we know, and I'll use an example from the big book to illustrate this process. So we take Bill's inventory on Mr. Brown. Remember Mr. Brown? Everyone talks about Mr. Brown in the big book. Mr. Brown, he's a resentment Bill's got. And why is he resentful at Brown? Well, 3 reasons. Brown's kind of interested in Lois, his wife. And he told Lois about his mistress, right? And Brown may get his job at the office. 3 big reasons why Bill is pissed at Brown. So what is Brown threatening or affecting with Bill? Well, he's affecting Bill's sex relations, both with his mistress and his wife. He's affecting self-esteem, because around Brown, he's got to feel like an arrogance. Who are you to be meddling in my life? Mind your own business. And around Lois, he's got to feel like a heel because he's cheating on her. And his ambitions are being thwarted, right? Both domestically and business-wise. His pocketbook's going to be threatened if he gets his job at the office, or Lois says, I want a divorce and I want half. And his security, both domestically and business-wise, is being threatened. Now, here's the kicker. What's Bill's part in this scenario? How does his troubles basically arise out of himself to create this problem? And we realize that anger and resentment, dishonesty, infidelity, lust, false pride. And false pride's an interesting, defect. False pride, when I exaggerate Cameron, and I tend to go for exaggeration, I venture down the path of arrogance. And when I can be so arrogant in diminishing the value of another, the ultimate form of arrogance is murder, where I devalue someone so much that I can take their own life. The other side of the same coin is the self-loathing, the self-pity, the self-deprecation, where I diminish who I am in relation to others, and the ultimate expression of that trajectory is suicide. And those are the 2 extremes of false pride, murder or suicide. But false pride is kicking in here. He's probably arrogant around Brown and self-loathing around Lois. It's certainly selfish and self-seeking because it's all about Bill. Jealousy around Brown being around Lois, and suspicion of Lois being around Brown. irresponsibility, because he's blaming Brown. As soon as I'm blaming someone, when I'm in resentment, I'm blaming someone else on how I think and how I'm feeling and how I'm behaving. You embarrassed me. You hurt me. You hurt my feelings. You made me do that. I give all my power over to you and blame you. Lack of power, that's my dilemma. And then because you think, feel, and behave in a certain way towards me that's unthinkable, and we can learn a lot from our Koanon, Al-Anon, Coda brothers and sisters about this, my battle cry is this: I need to change you in order for me to feel okay about Cameron. And so I people please, and I martyr, and I bully, and I get uncommunicative, and I implement all these codependent strategies to somehow try and change you. And of course, typically the other person's playing the same game with me. And hence war is declared. So I get irresponsible. As soon as I have a resentment, I know I'm being irresponsible. And then fears, there are probably a number of fears that kick into place. Fear of divorce, fear of losing his job, fear of having no sex. Lois isn't going to have sex with him anymore, and his mistress is out of the scene, right? That's Bill's part. That's the inventory. Now notice I didn't have to go into any details or tease out each scenario, just identify the character defect. And then I invert them in column 5. What should I do instead? How can I set matters straight? How can Bill right this wrong? And we map it out principle-wise. Now, when you get to steps 8 and 9, we're gonna look at the specific manifestations of these principles. But all we're doing in step 4 is mapping out the defect versus the principle. So in column 5, acceptance. Acceptance of Brown, acceptance of his situation, forgiveness, love, honesty, faithfulness, intimacy, humility. Humility is a very powerful character principle because it is getting to the truth of who I am. I know my strengths. I know my weaknesses, and it's humility that allows me to guide life more successfully. My ego says, I should be able to dust it up with Joe, and he's in his 30s because he's pissing me off about something, and we can go to fisticuff. But my humility tells me, as a 69-year-old man who hasn't been in a fist fight since he was 25, nothing good is going to come out of me dusting it up with Joey. That's how humility works, to know oneself. I know who I am. I know my strengths. I know my weaknesses. And that intel allows me to navigate the vicissitudes of my life. To be unselfish, to be helpful to others, to have trust, to be responsible, to have faith in God's power and wisdom, and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be. Now that is a good root cause and condition inventory of one particular resentment. And that's how I do it. And most step 4s that I do with people, I can do in less than 2 hours. Because I don't do an archaeological dig. I think I learned that from you, Chris. You were talking about archaeological digs. I thought that's a great analogy of some way some people approach inventory. I had a woman approach me and said to me, Cameron, would you hear my inventory? My sponsor says I haven't done enough work. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? She said, well, my sponsor said I failed to list the resentments I had towards my mother when I was still in her womb. Who comes up with this crap? Right? I couldn't believe it. I said, how many resentments are we talking about? She says 475. It was like an opus. Like, I'm going to need to do inventory having to hear that much crap. Now, you see, the thing is, when I did my inventory, and I go for the big ones, I go for the big resentments, the big fears, the big harms, because that's renting the most amount of space in my head and the lion's share of the defects that block me from an intimate two-way relationship with the one who has all the power is going to be uncovered in those big resentments. So when I think of somebody and I want to cut them up into little pieces and package them in butcher paper and put them in the freezer and then distribute the remains as I see fit, that's probably a good person to put down on my resentment list. And when I think of someone I've harmed and I cringe in embarrassment or shame or guilt, that's a good one to put down on the harm list. And then out of those two manifestations, I'm going to figure out what are the fears that are driving them. You know, when I work with resentment, the first thing I ask the person, what is your selfish, self-seeking motive? What keeps your hands around their throat? And I try to tease out the motive that keeps them locked into the resentment, because if we're going to free them from resentment, we need to understand our motive. It may be, well, they're not paying me back the money they owe me, or they won't admit their fault, or they won't respect me, right? I want respect. I want my money back. And I go, well, knowing this person the way you do, what's the likelihood of that happening? They go, well, it's not very likely at all. And I said, well, then would you agree that having this selfish, self-seeking motive is rather futile, fatal, and destructive in your life? And usually I can get agreement. And then I go deeper with it. I said, what's the fear that's driving it? Now, a lot of the resentments I hear are pride-based resentments. And the fear usually comes down to well, I'm afraid of rejection. Go deeper still. When someone rejects you, what does that mean? Well, it means I'm not lovable. And when you're not lovable, what is that signifying? We go deeper with it still. Well, that I'm not worthy. I'm not acceptable. I'm not good enough. Now we're getting down to a root fear. And then I tease out, and what are the other character defects that come out to try and protect you from this fear, the irresponsibility, the dishonesty, and so on and so forth. So that's how I tackle the resentments. Now, in fears, I always like to say fears are fake news. And our fear instruction is very simple. We review our fears thoroughly, 5 columns as an analysis. We put them on paper, Kydland's Law, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. And we asked ourselves, why are we angry? Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Now, some of you know I created a workbook, and in this workbook, I map out 2 of my biggest fears. Now, one of my biggest fears was fear of rejection. Okay? I fear rejection. Why do I have this fear of rejection? Well, my parents were never there for me. My spouse left me. It hurts me when people reject me. I feel like stab me through the heart when I'm rejected. And people don't seem to like me. Well, what does that threaten in Cameron? Well, it threatens my self-esteem. It threatens my security. It threatens my ambitions, my money, my relationships, and I don't get laid a lot. And I got a lot of things going on that creates this fear of rejection. So what's my best thinking? What's my best self-reliant thinking to protect me from this fear? Now, I think fears are fake news. They're built on half-truths. They're built on dishonesty. So what kind of a man do I construct defect-wise when I'm dealing with the fear of rejection? Well, I get into false pride, particularly self-loathing. Oh, what's wrong with Cameron? Why does nobody like me? And then I get selfish and self-seeking. I have motives. I need to be the center of attention. I need to have recognition from others. I need to be approved by others, right? To protect me from my fear of rejection. And so in order to do that, then I get very dishonest with myself and other people. I get into suspicion. I get into people pleasing. I martyr myself. Oh, how could you treat me that way? Look at all I've done for you. And I martyr. And I'm full of dishonesty and suspicion. And underneath that is the deepest fear, the fear of being unworthy, the fear of being invisible, the fear of being unacceptable. Now look at the man I've created in that column. Do you want to be friends with that person? Do you want to go into business with someone like that? Do you want to have an intimate relationship with someone like that? Like, I literally create the very thing I fear. I've created a rejectionable person. When I started doing fear inventories, it was so enlightening. I love looking at my fears because the intel, what it reveals, is so powerful. And so Viktor Frankl, in his book called Man's Search for Meaning, actually describes this process and calls it paradoxical intention. I literally manifest that which I fear. I fear institutional authority, government. So what do? I cheat on my taxes. I slander the government. I might keep illegal weapons. I might carry illegal weapons. I literally do things that bring government right to my door to incarcerate me. Now that's stupid. But that's the paradoxical intention of my fear of institutional authority. So what's the way out? Humility, to be unselfish, to be helpful to others. For the last 22 years in the program, all I've done is try to recognize others, approve of others, make others the center of my attention, to recognize. That's all I do. Now, I never did anything for any other intention other than to be helpful to the person who suffers. But God goes, Cameron, you take care of those that suffer. I'll take care of you. Now, it wasn't my intention, but I'm known all over the world. Like, I've traveled all over the world because of this way I carry my message. I've been to Denmark, Sweden, all across England, United States, Canada, and I'm constantly getting accolades from people. Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But I flipped it on its head and I give it away. It's like sponsorship. In order to keep it, I got to give it away. I got to pay it forward. That's the paradox of our program. So all I did was give away that, and God just kind of takes care of me in this process. It's really quite extraordinary. To be responsible and accountable for my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, so I can be responsible to others as a responsible, trusted servant, a friend, a spouse, a parent, a son, etc. To be congruent and honest, do what I say I'm going to do, to have trust my senses, trust my intuition, and to have faith in God's power and wisdom and the courage to be the man I'm meant to be. And that's a fear inventory. Now, with harms are a little different. They're a little different process. So in the harm inventory, we look at, and there's some distinctions here. We reviewed our own conduct, all harms to other, including sex. Bill talks mainly about sex conduct, but he does say we make a list of all harms we created. So I use the instructions on sex harms as a general set of instructions for any kind of harm over the years past. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Column 4. Whom did I hurt? Column 1. Did I unjustify, and that's the key, did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, bitterness, or whatever? Column 2. Where was I at fault? Column 4. What should I have done instead? Column 5. We all get it down on paper and look at it, remembering Kidlin's law. So in a harm inventory, let's take Bill's harm to his spouse, Lois. Now, I start with column 4 when it comes to a harm. What did I bring to this relationship to harm it? Well, in this case, Bill brought false pride, lust, infidelity, dishonesty, selfishness, self-seeking, inconsideration, irresponsibility, fear of no sex, intimacy, divorce, or being alone. Now, taking those character defects that he's employing in this relationship with Lois, make column 3 not about him, but about the person we've harmed. Did he affect Lois's self-esteem? Absolutely. Did he affect Lois's sex relations? Yes, he did. Did he affect Lois's security, her ambitions, her money situation? Yes, he did. And as a result of the affair, what did he unjustifiably arouse? He aroused jealousy, resentment, distrust. She felt inadequate. She felt betrayed, unworthy, and unloved. That's the damage done that needs to be cleaned up. So what principles are going to clean this situation up? Humility, intimacy, faithfulness, honesty, unselfishness, helpfulness, consideration, responsibility, faith, and courage. Now, by bringing those principles to his marriage, is he going to affect Lois's self-esteem? Absolutely, but in probably a very positive way. Her sex relations, her security, her ambitions, and pocketbook, and as affecting those areas of her life in a very powerful and loving way, he's going to clean up what's going on in column 2. And so that's how I approach my harms. And I list all of this in that workbook that I created for the 12 Steps, 4 Hours workshop group. And you can download it for free. It's there for your use or helpfulness. So in conclusion, if we've been thorough about our inventory, and to me, thorough means the big stuff. This can be interpreted many ways, but I interpret it as doing the big stuff. We have written down a lot. We've listed and analyzed our resentments, 5 columns. I've begun to comprehend because I see all these character defects that are coming up again and again and again and again in every relationship I've destroyed. And I see a pattern emerging, a cluster of character defects that are problematic for me. I've analyzed these resentments in my 5 columns. I see how futile, fatal, and how terribly destructive column 4 is my life. And that sets the groundwork for step 6. Where I'm entirely ready to have God remove these character defects. We've listed the people, column 1, whom we've hurt by our conduct, column 4, and are willing to straighten out the past we can, column 5. If you've already made a decision, step 3, I'm going to go God's way. I'm going to live a spiritual, moral approach to my life and all my affairs. Made the step 3 decision, an inventory of our grosser handicaps. That is the big defects. You've made a good beginning. That being so, you've swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. Now, my concluding caveat is this. This is from Wally P. and Back to Basics. Note, it is not necessary for newcomers to talk about every resentment or every selfish act or person they have harmed or lied to for the inventory to be thorough. My God, that's heresy in the rooms. The objective is to get down to causes and conditions. Sometimes it takes only a few incidences to make clear which shortcomings have kept the newcomer blocked from an intimate two-way relationship with the one who has all the power. And I'm for that. How about you? God bless. Thank you so much.